Okay, so good evening, everybody. Thank you for conversation on Black and Palestinian liberation. Before I begin, I want to thank Psychopa for hosting us this evening, and to thank everyone who's dropping by, and who came just to be here. I'm very delighted to introduce our two speakers for this evening. The first speaker to my right is Dr. Nadia Alahmed. She's a Palestinian scholar, educator, and activist. Her research revolves around Black radical thought and politics, critical hip-hop studies, Black internationalism, and the political, historical, and cultural connections between Black America and the Middle East. She has a book coming out on the topic with Massachusetts University Press, provisionally shortened title is Black Intifada. And to my left, I'm also joined by Dr. Dante O'Hara, another kind of doctor, who is an organizer, scientist, and writer. He is the outgoing organizing director for the Claudia Jones School for Political Education, which is a DC-based popular education organization. Dante is also a part of the recently formed DC for Ceasefire Now coalition, which is fighting for a DC Council resolution against the genocidal policies of the Biden administration. So I'm going to give each of the speakers 20 minutes roughly to talk, and then I'll open up to a Q&A with a few questions. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. How are you all today? Excellent. I love that. I'm on my last nerves. I'm like, okay, excellent. Good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all for being here so much. This is the kind of space I crave. I was insulted today and called a scholar. I was like, I'm not a scholar. I'm an educator and an activist. I'm really much not an intellectualism kind of person. I'm Palestinian, not Palestinian American. So that means that my reality, my everyday is drastically different. Not to minimize, suffering and trauma of Palestinian Americans, but it's really not the same for us. My entire family is in Jenin, in West Bank, right now. I hope and pray that by the end of this talk, Jenin was bombed again today for bajillionth time this year. So I really hope that, everybody's okay and everybody's alive. But my talk today in this book on the history of Black and Palestinian radicalism is really a small part of me trying to write a thank you letter for Black activists and Black radicals in the 60s and 70s and 70s and 80s today who sacrificed a lot to stand on the, I don't like saying the right side of history, but we're essentially the only people in the entire Western Hemisphere to speak up for Palestinians. So yes, this is my thank you letter. Let's see how that goes. So the key points I'm trying to make, very few people know that the history of Black and Palestinian solidarity is at least a century old. At the dawn of the 20th century, Black and Palestinian Marxists, leftists, progressives, radicals were reading publications that address the issues and talk about people's struggle over the globe. And in Black America are reading similar, progressive newspapers and radical newspapers and starting kind of slowly, not slowly, but gradually developing a sense of identification. But it was the Black Power, Black Arts Movement era of 60s and 70s that turned this kind of sense of connection, these kind of cultural, political, spiritual bridges into a movement. The movement that we see here right now. and that will last, I think, for quite long. So I'm trying to argue that, it was the Black Power, Black Arts era that really created a systematic, widespread, complex, multi-layered movement out of the solidarity that had been kind of booming for since the beginning of the 20th century. I argue I'm currently trying to focus on Black radical feminists, specifically, the discourse, the books and theories and language produced by Kumbahi River Collective, by Audre Lorde, by Bell Hooks, by June Jordan, who were, leftist, progressive, radical, queer Black women who, realized quickly that, no one is free until Black women are free, and Black women are not free until women in the global South are not free. They made this movement a lot more inclusive. So when, in 2013, Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, and Patrice Couleurs, when Alicia Garza, kind of started the language and started the Black Lives Matter movement, they were operating on a language created by Alice Walker and the Black radical feminist discourse in the 70s and 80s. Again, Alice Walker, June Jordan, of course, Dr. Angela Davis, and so many others. So I argue that, that shaped, in many ways, the culture and the language behind Black and Palestinian radicalism. Gaza to Ferguson happened in 2014, which is kind of the most current, I argue, reinsurgence of Black and Palestinian solidarity movement, when activists in Palestine and activists in Ferguson, where uprisings in Ferguson were happening, realized that they're being targeted and tear gassed by the same exact US-produced weapons. And so Palestinian activists and freedom fighters started to Twitter to say, hey, Black brothers and sisters, this is what you do, this is how you protect yourselves from it. I know the effects of US-produced tear gas all too well. And of course they did, and so that, Black activists in Black America were, fascinated by the discovery that there were so many connections between the systems that oppressed them. And there was kind of, back then in 2014, they were like, unprecedented movement, Black people care about Palestinians, Palestinians care about Black people. No, it had been happening for decades. It was just not a part of mainstream discourse. And finally, I argue that Black and Palestinian struggles are extremely intertwined in the political forces, historical, political, religious forces that shape them, like third world Marxism, like the astounding anti-colonial victories on the African continent that mesmerized both Palestinian freedom fighters and, of course, Black Americans here. So those ideology put forth, but you name it, Kwame Ture, Pan-African leaders like him, Gamal Abdel Nasser, were embraced by both groups. And so Bangtan Conference was crucial, the 1955 conference where people of the global South, people fighting for their freedom and for justice for them and their people, collected a number of people that represented, I would say, 2/3 of the planet's population. And Kwame Ture and Gamal Abdel Nasser were one of the founders of the idea, one of the two people who really made it happen. And so at that stage, during the wake of tail end of civil rights movement in 55, beginning of the Black Power, Black Arts era in 60s and 70s, both Black and Palestinian, I can call them both freedom fighters. They were motivated by books and ideas of third world Marxists, of people like third world Marxists and Black Marxists, people like Che Guevara, people like Mao Zedong, et cetera, et cetera. They learned the same language, they learned similar kind of patterns of liberation, strategies of liberation, their goals, as you can see on the slide. So both emphasize popular resistance. Everybody shows up. Nobody sits at home. Everybody shows up. Everybody shows up. Everybody's fighting. Everybody's speaking. Everybody's crying. But they're doing it together. Internationalism was crucial for this idea, the idea that, the kind of way of thinking that Malcolm X propagated for most of his life, the idea that Black people are not an oppressed minority, they're actually a powerful global majority. And they have more than it takes to not only achieve freedom, to, be their best possible selves in a system that does not dehumanize them and erase them. So both kind of look for one another. Black radicals look to the Middle East and Africa. Palestinians look to Pan-African, for example, somebody like Gamal Abdel Nasser, Egyptian president, became both a Pan-Arab and Pan-African symbol, not just in wars. He was arming anti-colonial struggles all over the world. And Palestinians were really revering people like Ghanaian revolutionary president. Kwame Nkrumah, thank you very much. It's been a long day, I apologize. And so another kind of important tactic that they both use is institution building. Black Panthers were feeding kids, created, clinics, free clinics. Fred Hampton, of course, was behind a lot of that. Their own spaces for education, their own spaces for, cultivating Black self-determination, independence. And PLO was doing exactly the same, and I could easily argue that they learned that from the Black Panther Party, because Palestinian Liberation Organization is also building, clinics for refugees who are being systematically mistreated everywhere in the world. So creating these institutions and these spaces for Palestinians and Palestinian refugees to be safe, to be healthy, to be successful, etc. Self-publishing was a tremendous deal for both Black and Palestinian liberation. Just the idea that you no longer need approval from white editors, from white publishers on what and how you can say. Complete independence. So Third World Press, for example, was founded by Hakeem al-Buti or Don Italy, and it still exists until today in Chicago. Just some examples. The goals, of course, of Black and Palestinian movements of 60s and 70s were self-determination at every level. Nobody gets to tell me who I am. Nobody gets to tell me, how to live or how to love or, how to function in society and the world. So on every level, spiritual level, individual level, community level, etc. Of course, both groups were struggling for various forms of nationalism, economic nationalism, cultural nationalism, just complete institutional independence and separation from white supremacy, from colonial forces, etc. And finally, I'm not trying to say that Black rights movement and Black power movement were somehow homogenous, not at all. But the ideology that connected the different organizations and the various ideologies permeating in the Black power and Black rights movement were, in fact, various forms of nationalism, down to an organization called Republic of New Africa, which in 1973, I believe, proclaimed the territory for Black people on a land that they had earned with their trillions of dollars worth of free labor. So a Black republic existed, and it was not just a metaphor, a dream. A Black country existed for about a week because CIA and them, whoever showed up. Palestinians were looking for the same. They were looking to get some of their land back and create their own government and be completely independent. Still with me? There's pictures. Ooh, that always gets blurred up. So this is Al-Hajj al-Malik al-Shakaz, that people probably know as Malcolm X. Malcolm X is crucial for Black power and Black rights movement as ideological, spiritual, political kind of aspiration. Black power writing, protest techniques, etc., were heavily influenced by him more than anyone else. And in 1964, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, whom I mentioned before, advises Malcolm X goes to Gaza, to the Gaza Strip, because at that time Egypt is in control of the Gaza Strip. And so he goes, he spends a day there, and he's absolutely, mesmerized by his meeting Palestinian intellectuals, religious figures like Muhammad Ziso. He meets poets, he meets, just people, our people, my people. And a Palestinian poet shares a piece of his creative writing about the experience of being, a refugee in your own land. And Malcolm X is so mesmerized by it that he transcribes it in his diary from Arabic. And so he spends about 24 hours in the Gaza Strip. He goes back to Egypt, and Malcolm is just not the same anymore. And immediately he's introduced to Ahmed Shqairi, to the newly formed Palestinian Liberation Organization, and kind of becomes hyper aware about the necessity of Black and Palestinian solidarity and work. He ends up kind of describing or exposing, his experience, his thoughts on the Black and Palestinian liberation in the Zionist Logic, an article that he publishes in Egyptian Gazette, dismantling Zionist ideologies and discourses. Now, we made it to Black Power movement era. Kwame Nkrumah is the gentleman on the right. The gentleman on the left is Stokely Carmichael, aka Kwame Ture. The woman in the middle is unfortunately a lot less known. Has anybody ever heard of Ethel Minor? Well, Black women unfortunately really often get overlooked in these histories. So Ethel Minor, who's in the middle, becomes radicalized during her travels in Colombia, which is also, fighting anti-imperial wars and stuff. And she also forms this kind of third world consciousness, if you may, and also is closely working with Malcolm X, and she's inspired to publish the infamous SNCC, Student Violent Coordinating Committee newsletter. The newsletter consists of 32 various points talking about Israeli government supporting South African apartheid in money and weaponry, systematically destabilizing 54 nations of the African continent. And these are just 3 points. Again, there's 32, this is 25 through 27, and I decided to highlight them because they talk about the fact that brown and Black Jews are treated as second-class citizens in Israel. They talk about the fact that, it is a settler colonial white project, that it is an imperialist project, and the point with South Africa resonates with a lot of Black, not just radicals, Black people who were around, and that letter was very widely circulated, and some Black historians like Clayburgh Carson believe that this newsletter that Ethel Minor put forth and Stokely Carmichael defended the rest of his life, officially ended kind of civil rights movement era, because white people left the movement, Jewish white people left the movement, and consciously, even Student Violent Coordinating Committee said, we no longer want, holding hands and singing songs. We're a Black Power organization now. We're Black people only. So for Black people, by Black people, about Black people. So Algeria, after its independence, becomes this epicenter of global radicalism. And Fatah, the Palestinian Democratic Socialist Party, and Black Panthers, Black Panther Party members like Eldridge Cleaver, is pictured right there, like Kathleen Cleaver, again, are so excited by their, this emerging, or not emerging, as a movement, emerging Black and Palestinian solidarity movement, and they throw this press conference that's, shown all around the Middle East and Africa. So Black Panther Party newspapers published dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of pro-Palestinian publications. They translated speeches by the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine, the Marxist Palestinian Organization, Al-Fatah. On the right, there's Yasser Arafat, of course, Che Guevara on the top, because obviously, kind of featuring freedom, celebrating Palestinian freedom fighters. This is my favorite piece in the middle that says Palestine. So Black Panther Party newspaper published different communications that were sent to them for other, marginalized, oppressed peoples of the world. And this one was sent from Palestine, and it chose to showcase it as a badge of honor. But again, this is just 4 pieces from dozens and dozens and dozens. Sometimes these new Black Power Panther newspapers would have, 3, 4 articles in support of Palestine. Incredible thing that comes out of the Pan-African Cultural Festival in Algeria is that Don El-Lee, aka Hakim al-Bouti, aka iconic Black arts movement poet who founded Third World Press, publishes this beautiful Pan-African issue featuring letters and art by, am I yelling?
No.
Okay. I'm really loud. Featuring, Afrocentric Pan-African art, artists, poets, etc. And right there in the corner, if you're able to see, left corner, there's a little Arab guy. Not he's an Arab guy, he's a Palestinian guy. How do I know he's a Palestinian guy? Hakim al-Bouti published 5 main poets of Palestinian resistance in that issue. So think about what it means. People, only Black people, people of Africa, people of global Black diaspora, and the 5 Palestinian poets. That was a statement. That was very, very, very intentional, very on purpose. This on the left here is a piece of the first book of Palestinian poetry or Palestinian literature, or Palestinian anything in the history of the United States of America. It was published by Charlie Cobb and Judy Richardson, who were members of SNCC. So they, Palestinian and Palestinian Lebanese intellectuals who had tried to publish it were rejected by dozens of presses. Then they come to Drum and Spear Press, founded by SNCC activists, prolific SNCC activists, and they say, yes, we'll do it. It's, until this day, remains the only non-Black publication Drum and Spear Press ever published. So Palestinian literature even exists in America because of Black Power movement. So this is my kind of new emphasis I'm trying to make, again, reinforce the conversation and the impact that Black radical feminism in the 70s and 80s, again, Combined River Collective, Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde, Alice Walker, June Jordan, and the systematic efforts they were making to, to speak up for Palestine in various ways. Top corner, that's Angela Davis meeting Arafat. It happened sometimes in the 70s. But something even more beautiful happened in that decade. I'm not exactly sure when. Nobody will tell me. I asked them, and they're like, I don't know. People who were alive back then. Palestinian political prisoners learned that Angela Davis was wrongfully imprisoned and were writing her letters of support from Palestinian prisons, offering support to her and sometimes begging for help, honestly. And Angela Davis is still insanely outspoken about Palestine, despite all of the strict awards that she had to endure, despite, the slander against her. She's still speaking for Palestine until this day. And they don't like to say, you don't believe me that Black and Palestinian people have a lot in common? Well, listen to freaking Professor Angela Davis, because she wrote this book, Freedom is a Constant Struggle, Ferguson, Palestine. So this is where she outlines how the systems of oppression targeted at Black people are so similar to the systems of oppressions in Palestine. Police state, militarization of police, surveillance. Israel systematically invites police departments to Israel for training to teach them how to torture, how to interrogate, how to surveil better. Self-respecting towns and I don't know, I feel like self-respecting police precinct is kind of like an oxymoron, but those who are out there usually say no. This right here in the left corner is a Pulitzer Prize winning incredible activist, teacher, and author, Alice Walker. She's on board of the Gaza flotilla trying to deliver aid to people in Gaza in 2009. And there's a sign behind her that says "End the Siege." And so she comes back and she writes "Overcoming Speechlessness" in 2010, talking about her experiences in the Gaza Strip, talking about the amazing connection she had developed with Palestinian women in Gaza, talking about her life for Palestinian people, and just, her experience with Code Pink and her Palestinian activism. Incredible book. And last but not least, this is a mural of June Jordan, a journalist, teacher, author, incredible person. This is a mural that was painted this year in Oakland, portraying her. You can't quite see it, but she's wearing a kufiya, she's wearing a Palestinian scarf, next to a Black Power sign. And again, June Jordan is somebody who spent her entire lifetime trying to help my people. She traveled to the refugee camp during the Sabra and Shatila massacre, when 4,000 Palestinians were slaughtered in 2 days, enabled by Israeli army. She writes this extremely moving poem, Moving Towards Home, based on that experience, that she ends with something like, I was born a Black woman, but today I've become a Palestinian. Years later, a Palestinian spoken word poet, Suhair Hamad, writes a poem that says, I was born a Palestinian, but today I've become a Black woman. Nobody's trying to steal anyone's identity or appropriate it. They're both talking about the resonance between their kind of revolutionary love, identification, and sisterhood with one another. So this is my current research. Thank God for Black women. Back then and also now and forever. Yeah, the one person who was like, yes, yes. Almost done. So this is Dr. Lamont Hill, Dr. Mark Lamont Hill. He paired up with the Dream Defenders, the young men standing next to them. Dream Defenders have visited Palestine many, many times, Bethlehem, Jerusalem, wherever they were allowed to go. Mark Lamont Hill, writes and talks about Palestine, the importance of Palestinian and Black struggle regularly. And then whoever is on the next flag is, that slide is not really important, but I think it's a beautiful metaphor to take a Palestinian flag and write Black Lives Matter in the middle of it. So I feel like it symbolizes what the movement is truly about. Like time? I wanted one slide left.
No, go for it. We're flexible here.
Airtime. This mural, where George Floyd is only one of dozens of murals of him in the Gaza Strip. Israeli showed up, tried to paint over it, they painted it again. There are dozens of posters, stickers, beautiful murals like this in the Gaza Strip. For reference, that's like 2 people walking by it. They're huge. I think it's just a little bit of kind of to show that, these things never happen or never are one-sided. And I took this last picture on the right, featuring the great South African revolutionary who overthrew the apartheid regime, of course, Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela sent us a statue of himself. We love it. We call it Nelson Mandela Roundabout. And of course, Nelson Mandela and ANC spend their entire lives, and Nelson Mandela himself said so many times things like, our freedom is never complete without the freedom of our Palestinian brothers and sisters. So he's somebody who also spent a lifetime fighting apartheid, not only in his own land, but globally. And actually, Israeli financial weapons and political support of South African apartheid regime was one of the big reasons why a lot of Black people in America, it really helped them figure out what Israel is actually about. It's like they're giving weapons to people who try to oppress and ethnically cleanse, weapons, political support, money, etc. Join the resistance. Boycott works. It worked in South Africa. It will work here. I guarantee it. Even people out there losing bajillions already. Keep up the good fight. Honestly, educate yourselves, educate your families, Everybody has like a racist uncle or somebody who hates Muslims or Arabs, tell them. It's important. You have power. It's the systems that oppress you that constantly tell you and tell me that, we don't have power, but it's just not true. And after 17 of research on this topic with Black and Palestinian solidarity, I can assure you that what I've learned, that Black and Palestinian struggles are not only intertwined, that Black and Palestinian freedom are dependent on one another. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing? The vibe is kind of tired.
A little hot.
It's a little hot, yeah. I'm gonna stand if that's all right, folks. It's hard to move around and talk, but I know there's a live stream that I have to stay in like one spot.
Flame.
And turn it off.
On this camera, right?
So we'll just turn off the projector so I don't blind myself. Yeah, so I just want to preface by saying thank you to Nadia for that wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
And we should give it up for her one more time. I would preface as well, I'm not an expert on this topic, but I am a Black person and I'm very involved with the struggle locally here in DC. So, and I have some personal stories of like how I got here. So when I lived in Ohio, when I was in graduate school at Ohio State, it's a terrible place to be, I'm just kidding. I joined the communist movement, and one of my closest comrades was Palestinian, and he was a lawyer. I don't know if I'm yelling, so I'm hearing that same feedback here. Too close, okay, so I need to just be like this. So he was a lawyer, he's Palestinian, and every year he went to either the Gaza Strip or the West Bank to do sort of medical missions. He raised like $30,000 every year to basically, help get medical supplies to folks that are obviously suffering from the siege of Gaza or the occupation of the West Bank. So he unfortunately died in 2019, not from the Israeli occupation, but you can relate the two. He ended up overdosing of drugs. It was like really, it's hard to get really deep here, but really like kind of fucked me up because he was a very close friend of mine, and he was actually someone that really brought the Palestinian question pretty close to me in that period that we knew each other. Not saying I was distant from it, but like I didn't know much. I was one of those typical folks that was like, I don't know anything, I'll deal with my own issues. But we had a plan of going to Palestine. He was going to take me on one of these trips. It never happened. So, all the fight I'm involved with today is like, for him mostly. Thanks, Yusuf. I had also two childhood friends in my hometown back in California who are also Palestinian, who are also very close to the struggle as well. So yeah, so I got involved with the movement and moved back to California for a little bit, but moved to DC in 2019, so I've been here for a little over 4 years. And yeah, so I guess the way I myself as a Black person relate to the struggle, and I'm gonna go a little bit prior to what the 60s were, to the We Charge Genocide petition and prior to that. So who knows about the We Charge Genocide petition of 1951? Okay, 3 folks, okay. So this was a petition, and it wasn't the first genocide petition technically. There was one that was about less than 10 years earlier by Du Bois from the National Negro Congress, but this was written by Paul Robeson, which some folks should know, William L. Patterson, who was a communist lawyer, also his wife, Louise Thompson, and a bunch of other folks that were very involved through the Civil Rights Congress. And it was basically, since the end of World War II, which was like 45 to 51, they had documented all the lynchings in the country and violence against Black Americans. And you can buy this petition online at internationalpublishers.org, shout out, but some of the books are here as well. But you can see all the documentation of what they were basically using the Genocide Convention, which came about in 48. And it's interesting, the Genocide Convention came about 48, the State of Israel became about 48, and this petition came about in 51, where they were basically arguing that a genocide is taking place against African Americans or Black folks in the US. So I'm prefacing that because it's related to today with the ICJ case of South Africa against Israel, right? So obviously they said it's a plausible genocide based off of their findings, but we know what's going on, right? So, I'm here to basically express my full and complete solidarity with the Palestinian people, their right for self-determination, their right to return to their homelands, and the right, for refugees to return, or at least full compensation for the refugees, and to overthrow this apartheid system that has been oppressing people for 75 plus years. So, but yeah, as Nadia said, which I don't need to really repeat, but a lot of Black Americans today have noticed, or at least from their parents or their grandparents or what they've read, that the Jim Crow system that existed in the South of this country is a parallel to what is under occupation in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza, even in historic Palestine, 48, Israel, what they call today, where Palestinians are treated as second or third class citizens. And, as you mentioned as well, darker skinned Jews, fall into this sort of category as well. And we see all these sort of contradictions coming out to light today, but they've always been sort of coming out to light since the founding of Israel. But I know there's a contradictory relationship with Black Americans and the Palestinian question. MLK is one example, but the right wing likes to use MLK as a trope, even though he had canceled his trip, his pilgrimage in '67 after the 6-Day War, because he decided this is not the right time, and a lot of folks were in his ear saying you should not go. People try to say MLK is a Zionist, there's question marks, of the framing and timing, but and obviously Malcolm X is way ahead of his time on that question. So it's it's a complicated relationship, and I'm relating that to DC because Eleanor Holmes Norton, our House delegate, was a part of a group. I'm forgetting the name, but it was a committee that was like a Zionist committee of Black Americans. I don't know how big they were, but it was led by Bayard Rustin. There was just a movie by him recently, which many contradictions with that man's life. But he virtually became like an agent for the state, but that's another story. Yeah.
Shots fired.
Yeah, well, okay, so he started this group, and then some folks, again, whoever knows the name, it's some Zionist committee for like Black Americans, there's a name for it. Eleanor Holmes Norton was a part of this committee. And today she has been unable to call for a ceasefire. And now we have, quote unquote, the vice president and the president are saying ceasefire for 6 weeks, whatever, But she can't even say that, which is like absolutely ridiculous. So there was a group of us that met with her in December. She gave us 7 minutes for a 30-minute meeting, and she literally read off her sheet of paper talking points, and then walked out on us. So she said she believes in a cessation of hostilities. She's concerned about the situation, yada yada, the same talking points, but she just walked out on us. And I think a week ago or 2 weeks ago, a group led by Code Pink and folks organized like 30 DC residents to basically show up to her office unannounced, and she called the police to escort her in, and they locked the door. So I'm not sure if she still has the same politics that she did in the 70s around that question of Zionism and that community that they did have. I know it's very pro-Israel, but she's obviously showing her stance and her position. Yes, she's old. You don't know, mentally where she's at, but she needs to come out for a ceasefire. This is the most basic question right now to stop the killing. I don't want to be too long-winded. You can cut me off whenever. Sometimes I talk too damn much. But so there's two things I wanted. Okay, there's two things I wanted to mention alongside the We Charge Genocide petition. And I'm glad you didn't mention this because I want to add to it. So Nadia mentioned Angela Davis and how when she was incarcerated, Palestinian prisoners wrote joint letters to her while she was incarcerated. And I believe when she traveled back to Palestine, I forget exactly where she was. It's probably when that photo was taken. One of the former prisoners that had written her, she met, I believe. And the only reason I just learned this because she wrote a new piece in that new Black magazine that's online, Hammer and Hope. I don't know if folks have been reading that. It's new. It's like Robin D.G. Kelly and Keegan Taylor. It's kind of like a new online lefty black magazine. But I just read it today because I was like, this is within the context of this conversation. So, but yeah, so she conversated with not only like other U.S. political prisoners, but also Palestinian and global political prisoners as well. And this is what like opened her up to the Palestinian question. And I want to say that before I get into my little segment here, but this expresses, well, starting with her, but also of today, and the previous years prior, like the Sheikh Jarrah and Shireen Abu Akleh, like all the uprisings that happened around Palestine in the past several years. The centrality. So this term centrality, it comes out of the communist movement, but you see it also in the Comedy River Collective collection, and you also see it in some other works, like the central role of the fight against racism, like within this country, like how when there's an uprising for black folks or something, or even if you go all the way back to slavery and the fight against Jim Crow and beyond, society moves forward. There's social change. Like black folks are leading that force. You need black people and people of color, but black people particularly, to basically unite the entire popular forces in the country, the working class and oppressed people. But globally, we can clearly see Palestine is that central force. Millions, if not billions, have been out on the streets since October 7th in support of the Palestinians, which is great. And it's showing like this change in the balance of forces globally, right? The empires, the imperialist forces are becoming more isolated on a global scale. And a lot of working class and oppressed people, either within those imperialist countries or outside, like the global south, are totally against this genocide policy. And, you can relate it to South Africa. You can relate it to, really South Africa, because you're just talking about it with how Israel was financing them, a apartheid government in South Africa, which was a fascist government, like in the 70s and 80s. They were working directly with Israeli intelligence and such. And, lo and behold, the Anti-Defamation League, which folks might know in this country, worked directly with Israeli intelligence to basically go after anti-apartheid activists for South Africa in this country, and also people fighting against Israeli occupation. So there's a connection there. So people that are fighting against South African apartheid, like, I'm connected to folks that were part of NIMSAL, which was the National Anti-Imperialist Movement in solidarity with South African liberation, or something like that. It's a long name. But, there was a connection between the Israeli occupation and the fascist South African government at that time. And the U.S. imperialist forces, these were outposts basically in Africa and the Middle East, that the U.S. was basically driving their policy for the colonial control of the region. So, and then you can really relate, how the South Africans with Namibia was like I like making these parallels between like Palestine and South Africa. So conditions are different materially. But like, if you want to relate something, you can look at Namibia, which was Southwest Africa or West South Africa at that time, was occupied by the apartheid government of South Africa. And you can make some argument about Gaza or West Bank if you want to make some like parallel. And then the same for like Rhodesia. So I'm sure I'm making like some parallels here. Like if y'all were to like relate South Africa, apartheid Israel, or Israel today, and the United States, like what are like three key things that all relate them? And this is like an audience question, so I like to engage my audience since y'all seem tired. So
Imperialism.
Okay, imperialism.
Segregation.
Segregation. Fascism. Okay.
Colonialism.
Say it again.
Colonialism.
Colonialism. Okay.
Because the last stage of capitalism is imperialism.
Okay.
White supremacy.
White supremacy. Anyone else?
Sexism.
Okay, you about name them all. Okay. Okay, so the obvious ones are basically said, settler colonialism, because these are settlers that are on the indigenous people's lands. You can say genocide, which is related to that. Racism. You can also say like anti-communism. Why anti-communism?
because these are capitalist states. They want to keep the capitalist structure worldwide. They want to keep Western hegemony, and
Go ahead, finish.
they want to keep Western hegemony. That's why I support BRICS, because they're trying to create a multi-polar world. Like we had a communist leader in my country, Mang Salamariam, and he helped liberate Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Rhodesia, and helped South Sudan become a country as well. And actually, Nelson Mandela troops were trained in Ethiopia. Fun fact. So, but like, yeah, I mean, I know Ethiopia is considered like a a lot of West African countries adopt our colors, and it's considered, even in Africana studies, they kind of Ethiopia is always one of those countries that are Rastafarian movement. You have all this, right? But I think you're right as far as the parallel, the capitalist structure. But I wish we mentioned like Tom Sankara, Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere. These leaders, they were pro-Palestine.
Name them.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So these Africa was definitely on it. I know today, unfortunately, it doesn't look like Africa is on as much. I know it's more so Algeria and South Africa campaigning in the African Union. We have to understand African Union is not. It's funded by the EU, who funds you, feeds you, and controls you. And so right now, Africa, we don't own Africa right now because of remember, these leaders were killed by CIA and MI6. Right. So, you have to understand today's Africa, like 70s, 80s, it wasn't as, like Cuba and Soviet Union. This is a different time. Now they have their neocolonialism at our neck. So we have a genocide right now in Ethiopia, the Amhara genocide. So we understand genocide right now. So
appreciate those comments.
Well, I mean, another thing was that the Soviets were arming Palestinian, like, guerrilla fighters, and so were the Chinese, and Cuba was also sending troops to fight the South African apartheid forces in Angola. So, the United States kind of used these places as outposts against revolutionary uprisings of colonized people in the Middle East and Africa. That these places were basically military bases. So if people tried to free themselves from the boot of U.S. imperialism, have military bases that could just immediately kind of invade and kind of destroy these popular uprisings, which they did. And they function as these kinds of like anti-communist bases against popular resistance movements.
Do you want to ask something too? Yeah.
Well, they often use countries like as scapegoats, so they fund like these fake dictatorships that they implant. Like I read a study, they fund about 70% of dictatorships around the world today.
Yep. All right. I don't know what my time is, right? Kind of engage the audience. I'm skipping ahead, sorry, a little bit, but this is kind of how I like to engage. But so I just want to add two things. You can cut me off whenever. So on the Angela Davis point, sorry, a little interjection right there at the whole connection there, but I think that's an important point that people did point out. So when she was incarcerated for those charges stemming from the Jonathan Jackson situation at the courthouse, why not blanking on the name? Okay, I'll come back to me. Anyway, so she was incarcerated, she was in jail, and they were trying to give her the death penalty. Okay, I'm just trying to fast forward. When she was fighting for her life and her freedom, there was a massive international movement for her freedom. And there was Angela Davis committees all over the world. I'm not sure if any existed in Palestine, maybe, because I'm curious how they found out about her incarceration. But my guess is they might have. Okay, gotcha. Okay. But there are hundreds of branches of these free Angela Davis committees that were organized. So after she was released on bond and got her charges dropped eventually, what came after that was a group called the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Oppression. So that was basically to take that energy from the free Angela Davis committees and organize them into a national, basically united front organization in the U.S., but also around the world, technically, that would fight for the freedom of political prisoners and to fight against racism. So in the 70s and 80s, the Wilmington 10 in North Carolina, that was a big campaign. Leonard Peltier was still in prison, incarcerated. There was some movement around him, which still is. And several other political prisoners. Joan Goodall Joanne Little, and several others. But Angela Davis, when she was free, she traveled all over the world, and she was a member of the Communist Party. So this gave her access to a lot of international organizations and trade unions and even governments that had power in the Eastern Bloc and East Germany and elsewhere, where she was able to speak to people about her case and other political prisoners within the United States around the world. So anyways, I'm just trying to skip forward, so I'm running out of time. But we have a local branch locally that is trying to build, some folks probably know about it, it's called the DC Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. We're kind of rebuilding because we had a branch back in the 70s and 80s that was really big. It fell apart. That's a long story, but it's revived since 2019. And we're working with the Palestinian Youth Movement, the Filipino Youth Not Bayan, and a bunch of other organizations as well. So fast forward as well, so that's related work. DC Ceasefire Coalition. So who knows about the work being done around a ceasefire resolution in the council? Okay, 3 maybe people, okay. All right, so I'm gonna try to get the rest of y'all on board. So anyways, okay, since October 7th, okay, let me give y'all a little bit of background. So when October 7th happened, the chairperson of the council, DC Council, Phil Mickelson, decided on himself that he's gonna light the building up in the Israeli flag colors just because he wanted to. No notice to anybody, he just did it because he has that power.
The DC Council building, right?
DC Council building, John Wilson building on Pennsylvania Avenue. It was up for nearly 40 days. So maybe about 10, 11,000 folks were having been killed by the time they took it down. And it took an effort, obviously, with the Palestinians to basically blow up his phone and tell him to take it down. But they were kind of reluctant to doing it. And a group, Harriet's Wildest Dreams, which is a Black abolitionist organization, they actually projected a Palestinian flag, like Free Palestine, on the building while the lights were up, which was great. Got good coverage. So anyways, due to that, and then we also learned that the DC government met with the Israeli government, the embassy, sometime after October 7th on some anti-Semitic training or some shit. I don't know what the real thing was, but someone got inside and set up some sort of training where the Israeli ambassador came and told them about Hamas and all this shit, all their propaganda. We caught whiff of it because we obviously know people that work as staff in the building, which they had to go to the same training, and they basically told us that this happened. So we put a petition out, which was actually a few different groups working separately, but then we all kind of merged some weeks after October 7th, and put a petition out that said, explain the situation in Gaza, but also given the context prior to October 7th, like the apartheid system, the occupation, etc. And that was signed at that time by like 1,700 DC residents, majority in Ward 1, which is this area, and basically fell to deaf ears. So what our demands were for the DC Council to take the lights down. They took the lights down finally after nearly 40 days, it's like 38. And the second thing was to have a briefing with Palestinians that live in DC. And they agreed to that. So that happened in November. So we had a lot of folks that actually had family in Gaza that had either been killed or currently being bombed or displaced, etc. And we've been working with them very closely during this obviously horrific time. And yes, we had this briefing and the majority of the council showed up, which was great. But basically nothing came out of it beyond thank you for your words. But our demands after that meeting, or basically during that meeting, was for a resolution, because it's like y'all already made a political decision and choice to put the lights up on the building and meet with the Israeli government. So like, if you want to do your people a favor, like the residents of the city that don't support what Israel's doing, pass the ceasefire resolution. Yeah, it's not going to change the policy of the Biden administration right now, but it represents the 700,000 people in DC who pay taxes, who do not have federal representation, to basically say we support a ceasefire and an end to the killing of Palestinians. And it's related to the safety of Palestinians here too in DC, because one of the women that was on this briefing panel, she was spat on for wearing tefillah down in DuPont, I believe. You know, there's a lot of anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian racism has come out of this rhetoric from our government and the media and just the situation in general. And there's been other instances, Jackson Reed High School, the Arab Student Union, which I believe is SJP now, they try to air Occupation of the American Mind, which is about the Israeli propaganda machine. And there's a Israeli lobby group called the JCRC, Jewish Community Relations Council. The Zionist group. They're mostly responsible for passing the IHRA definitions in Montgomery County and Alexandria and Arlington. That basically equates anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. But now they've been getting more involved with DC local politics. And the first thing they did was this Jackson Reed thing where they shut down, I don't have full proof of that, but we're pretty sure that they were responsible for talking to the administrators of the university and getting them to stop showing this film. So basically this group had to organize a busboys to have, you know, Palestinian and a film screening, like Palestinian events and film screening as well, like had busboys and poets out of their school. So that's one thing. And then there's another school, I'm forgetting which public school it is, but there's a woman working with her son. Yeah, with her son, there's a peace concert. And part of the peace concert was singing like different songs from different countries, like peace songs, supposedly. You know, South Africa, there's whatever, other countries. And one of them was a Israeli settler song. I forgot the name of it, it's just not stuck in my head, but it's literally an Israeli settler song. And they were like forced to sing this song because it's like part of their program, this concert. And you know, she asked the principal like, why the hell is this song in here? It's about like killing the Palestinians basically, or taking their land. And they basically told her it was DCPS that told us to do this. So now it's like up in DCPS, we're trying to deal with some stuff. We're also going through the Human Rights Commission in DC. We just had a public comment last week. So we're trying to get the Human Rights Commission in DC to put out a statement to push the council more. And there's a lot happening. So like I said, cut me off wherever, so I'll just keep going on. But you know, so since the beginning of the year, we had a press conference in front of the Wilson Building. A lot of allies and Palestinians in DC, small business owners. We're a very broad coalition right now. Small business owners, you know, grassroots folks, unions, interfaith leaders, faith leaders, that are all part of this coalition. And I want to give a big shout out to Reverend Haber, who's not here, but he's been a major component of this coalition thus far. And recently, we've been disrupting the council hearings just because they will not introduce a resolution. And the reason that they're giving us for not introducing a resolution is supposedly on two grounds. So one is they don't deal with international issues, which is absolute bullshit. And the reason why I say that because I was part of the coalition 6 months prior to pass the Cuba resolution calling into the blockade. And it passed with flying colors, unanimous, no questions asked. But October 7th happens, and they're like, "Oh, we don't deal with international issues anymore." And I'm like, "Wait, I was just in the room with you like 3 months ago when y'all voted on this thing. Like, you're lying." And then when the Ukraine war popped off, you know, this city went crazy for Ukraine. They put flags everywhere. They named streets after like Ukrainian dissidents or whatever. And they on the little machine out front of the building, it shows the tax money you pay as a DC resident that doesn't have federal representation. On the next signage that comes up, it says DC supports the people of Ukraine. So it's like, I don't know how that's not having a comment on an international issue, but it's a big contradiction. But the main reason is because there's two Zionist council members in DC. One is the Ward 1 council member, Brianna Doe, which is here. She used to intern for AIPAC. She was like a leader of the chapter of ADO that was in DC sometime. And I think she got married in Israel, something like that. I don't know, some weird stuff. She has like a blog online. It's really weird. But we basically organized ward-based meetings with each council member. And I was in the Ward 1 meetings. I live in Ward 1. and had a whole group of, obviously, Palestinians that lived in War I, but also progressive Jews, because she's Jewish. And, she used the anti-Semitic trope to, basically say, oh, you're all anti-Semitic. And then some organizers that she knew from other campaigns, like myself. And we had people from UNRWA, who were Palestinian. We had folks that were 48 Palestinians or Palestinian citizens in Israel, so like had that angle. We had folks that had family in Gaza that spoke to their families and in the West Bank. And she virtually ignored everything and just said, what about Hamas? And just like, it was just, I couldn't believe how like just tone deaf and just like, she just didn't want to listen to anything that she just heard from like all these people suffering from the bombings. And yeah, she just kind of left the room and was like, yeah, thank you for your time. I'm not going to consider a resolution. And then Matt Fruman is the other one in Ward 3. Supposedly he's been to the West Bank on some NGO thing, or East Jerusalem, one of the two, maybe both. And he actually sat through a 2-hour meeting with Ward 3 Palestinians and was very positive on that meeting, saying he's going to put out a statement. But a month later, after our first disruption of the hearing, there was a private meeting between him, Mendelsohn, Anita Bonds, and some Palestinians, and Reverend Hadler. And he basically said he will not vote for a resolution or even support one if it doesn't deal with Hamas, which is ridiculous because me as a U.S. citizen, I have no fucking right, sorry my language, but no right to tell the Palestinians who governs them, what they do with their life. All our responsibility here is to stop the weapons flow that's killing them. So ceasefire now, obviously the rhetoric is important, but to stop the $15 million of our taxpayer money from DC, but also in general, the U.S. arms dealing to, the genocidal government. So that's our responsibility. But it's not our responsibility to tell the Palestinians like who the hell governs them or what they want to do with their life. That is not. I don't live there. I don't speak the language. I'm not from there. That's not my homeland. Like those folks. We're basically trying to create conditions so they have the right to self-determination, right? So a right to sovereignty, a right to their homeland, etc. So that's just ridiculous. And there's also a racial dynamic within the council. So the majority of the black council members support a ceasefire. Janice Lewis George, Zachary Parker, Robert White. There's definitely a racial divide in the council on this question. And this comes back to the Black and Palestinian solidarity. Black folks understand, the relationship. And, this also expresses how deep Zionism is as a reactionary ass ideology that these two Zionist council members cannot get over their bullshit to come on board with just stopping the killing. So yeah, I'll stop there because I'm going off, but
Thank you.
yeah.
We'll have Q&A.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to both speakers for sharing your research, your knowledge, history of activism. So we are meant to go until 8, but we started 20 minutes late, and we'll just go 20 minutes if that's okay with Sankofa. I'm going to begin, if that's okay. I'll ask two questions to begin the conversation to both of you. And then we will, we'll open it to the audience, for you guys. And I'll pass around, we can do it with or without mics, maybe just identify yourselves. So my first question to you, Nadia, I'm just, listening to your presentation, thank you so much for it. I'm thinking about the way in which activists, and we've had this conversation already, but I'm going to bring it up again. We've been together the whole day, so I'm thinking about some of the black activists and thinkers from the early '60s, from the period of the Black Panther Party, and they're thinking about the reality of oppression of Black Americans and how they theorized and thought about that as a form of internal colonialism within the U.S., right? About the relationship between disenfranchised Black U.S. Black people and the United States government, and thinking about that reality and then extrapolating it to the rest of the world, right? And building solidarity to other colonized people who experience the settler colony, which colonizes internal Black and Indigenous people in this country, given its history, but acts externally as an empire, right, with its own systems and forms of oppression, and the Israeli state being one of the main instruments of U.S. imperialism in the land bridge between Africa and Asia. So I just want to hear more about these kind of connections, thinking about U.S. Black people's relationship to the states, internal colonialism, thinking globally, and what we can think about that. So this is my question to you. And in terms of Dante, thank you very much for this and for sharing all that your group has been doing for the DC ceasefire resolution and all this important work. And it is very important work precisely for the dynamics it unveils. If anything, these protest movements, going up to the council members and telling them we want a ceasefire and listening to the counter arguments and knowing which council members support genocide and which don't, and exposing these kind of dynamics are very important. But if I may just, for the sake of discussion, if we just talk about the example of Chicago, right, which is the biggest city in the US that has recently adopted the ceasefire resolution, and the mayor was the tiebreaker, right, with ties to the with long-standing ties to the National Alliance Against Racism and Political Oppression. And it passed, and it was a huge victory and a celebration. But then what, right? And of course, I'm not saying this to take away from the reality of the struggle of lobbying and the importance of that. But 6 months later, we have a social media broadcast genocide. Atrocity level, 100 people killed per day with our tax money. It's not being stopped. We are paying for it, and you all know what's happening. You all seen the children of the images of the children. I don't need to go into that in too much detail. But then what? How do we move beyond just ceasefire? How do we move the language to liberation? How do we move the language to imagining a place where everyone can live as equal citizens, as we enjoy the rights in this country, in theory anyway. So yeah. So I'd like to open these up to discussions to the audience. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try to be brief. I'm really excited about everybody's questions. In 1967, Stokely Carmichael, aka Kwame Ture, paired up with Charles V. Hamilton, and he wrote a book called Black Power, the Politics of Liberation America. It's available right there in front of the bookstore. This is a bookstore. Buy some books. Books are good. Books are like Instagram, but better. I'm not judging. I get my news from Instagram because I just don't trust any US media outlets. I don't want to hear from bajillion times that I'm collateral damage, pardon me. So, the book that Kwame Ture and Stokely Carmichael published, chapter by chapter, outlines using the Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, also being sold in the front, also by Fanon's books, Martinican and later adopted by Algerian people, revolutionary and psychiatrists. So basically, he uses, Kwame Ture and Charles Hamilton use Frantz Fanon's discourse on liberation and on armed resistance, and basically Fanon says that colonization is an inherently violent phenomenon, and the only way to defeat colonialism is with violence. That's the famous, infamous chapter on violence by Frantz Fanon. So basically, in that book, Kwame Ture articulated what Black Panthers, League of Revolutionary Black Workers, so many radical organizations of 60s and 70s were talking about, and essentially applied Fanon's anti-colonial theory to the situation of Black Americans successfully. If you don't believe me, read the book. He really did it. So that was an iconic book that was furthermore adopted and really followed carefully by not just Black intellectuals, by radicals all over the globe in kind of viewing that quote-unquote internal colonialism as something that can only be defeated by massive uprisings. If that all makes sense.
Very fine. I do want to add to that a little bit because there's a big debate on that question among Black Americans. Well, it was in the 60s at least. There's a book I would plug that's not in here, but it's getting reprinted in the spring, I think. Strategy for a Black Agenda. It's by a man named Henry Winston. He was a victim of McCarthyism, went blind in prison, died in the 80s. He was the chair of the Communist Party of this country for 20-some years. And he wrote a huge critique of that piece on domestic colony. But I'm not saying Kwame Ture is wrong or whatnot, but I think folks need to study that question deeply when we deal with the material conditions of Black folks in this country over history. But I'm a Marxist, so obviously I'm a little biased on that question. But anyways, so to the question of language and what comes next after a ceasefire, I mean, well, for one, first going into this, I didn't think it would be this hard to get the council members to be against genocide. And just the fact that that has been such a difficult task, shows that we have a lot more work to do in building up our movements and influence on people with political power or building power. And that's what we've been doing with building this coalition. So I think the strength of the coalition and the strength of the movements is going to determine policy and change, social change in the future. And until our movements are mature and developed enough, we're not going to see that change. This is what leads to nihilism and folks maybe doing like adventurous tactics and stuff that we've seen over time in the 60s and 70s that did not work. And we're still in the same position we're in today with, all types of catastrophes happening on our doorstep. But, I think if we're able to build the strength of this movement post-ceasefire and fight for not only a political solution, but like a liberated Palestine, historic Palestine, and even liberation for all oppressed peoples around the world, I think, it's just the movement is not a sprint, it's a marathon. That's like the best thing I've been told in my movement spaces, we have to organize, I think it's Kwame Ture, organize, I know a lot of folks get tired, and once they get a ceasefire, they're gonna lose people, right? Because some folks are only there for the ceasefire, but they don't wanna deal with what comes next, right? Because, we still got liberal Zionists, we still got folks that wanna go back to the status quo, they just wanna stop the killing, whatever. But, how do we advance our demands beyond the ceasefire once we attain it, right? And I think that's the role of the left, the communist left, folks that are in movements, Black folks, etc., to basically develop that mass consciousness among people, political consciousness, and guide them to the higher demands, right? So we fight for these basic level reforms today because folks need to survive or whatever it is, but we need to advance those demands to the next level. And this is why I identify as a communist, because I don't see ceasefire as the end goal for this specific case. I want an end to the occupation. I want folks in the West Bank and in Gaza and even historic Palestine to be fully liberated with full equal rights to return to the homeland, etc. And I want people here in the United States to have full equal rights and and political power. We live in a capitalist society, which obviously is profits over people, and we want a society that we can put people over those profits and destroy the monopolies and these exploitative business owners that fuel racism, sexism, all these other isms that are so horrible. So just to answer your question briefly, it's just I think it's consciousness raising and leadership and struggling in our everyday lives, in every aspect of our lives, political, social, and economic.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So we'll move to the audience now. Are there any questions, comments, interventions? Yes, and maybe you can identify yourself to us.
Oh, hi, yeah, my name, stand up or doesn't matter?
As you wish.
Okay, so no, my name is Rabel Getsu, and I'm an Ethiopian activist. Right now I'm doing a lot of activism for the Amhara genocide in Ethiopia. It's not new, it's been happening. Actually, the WHO president right now, Dr. Tedros Adhanom, he's of the Tigrayan ethnic group that was in power for 20 years. He was also part of the TPLF, the Tigrayan political party that was practicing nepotism. And so they were in power. He was sterilized when he was the head of the health department. And this sounds familiar to Israel in the sense of sterilization, because he was sterilizing Amhara women. So there was a silent genocide that was going on. Also just killing, silent killings. And there were other ethnic groups that were killed as well. But the target, the manifesto, was to kill Amharas. So from 1991, when they were in power, to 2017, they were killing Amharas. Then when the Oromos got into power, which is Abiy Ahmed, the prime minister of Ethiopia now, the difference with them is like, it's kind of like the Democrat and the Republican, in the sense that, people will say, oh, Democrats are more, the people feel like Democrats are more, they're gonna try to win the black vote over, smile in their face, do whatever, play the performative politics, but then not perform, right? Well, that's what the people is kind of moving in that kind of sly, sneaky way, in the sense that, they would kill you, they would kill Mars, and they would hire them tomorrow, saying, oh, that's so sad that happened. There's like 1 in 5 Ethiopians were spies. So, but the difference with Abiy Ahmed is he's killing us quadruple fold, like it's like hundreds a day. We had a Mikaj massacre, famous one was like 600 Mars died in 2 days. So, they're burning churches, mosques in Ethiopia. So we cry out to the Muslim community in the world. If you guys know Ethiopia's history, and it says in the Hadith about King Nagashi, who helped Muhammad's disciples, and they got safety in Ethiopia. And also Jews got safety in Ethiopia. So Ethiopia has played a pivotal role in the major religions worldwide. But unfortunately, and then the Beta Israel, the Ethiopian Beta Israel, the black Jews you guys talk about. Of course, there's Nigerian Jews, but the Ethiopian Beta Israel are the famous one that everybody talks about. And there was sterilization of them. So that's why I was correlating that. So this guy, the head of WHO, unfortunately. And so the Amhara genocide, we talk about Israel, Palestine. We're happy that Palestine is being aware, but you guys hear about Congo. Neopol killed millions. To this day, over 20 million Congolese have been killed. So it's in our hearts. Sudan, it's on fire right now, right next to Ethiopia. So I think coalition is very important. As an activist, I've attended the Palestinian protests in the DC area, the bigger ones and smaller ones. I try to represent Ethiopia because, actually, we have a protest coming up at the Turkey embassy because Turkey's supplying drones, UAE, of course. So, right now it's really bad in Ethiopia. From 2020 to 2024, where 1 million Ethiopians died. It's really bad. But our coverage is not, CNN, even Democracy Now!, she's lied about it. They've all lied. None of them, Al Jazeera lied. Reuters lied. They've been lying about our genocide and covering it up. And so we've been fighting. I think we're the commonality. We're going through a genocide ourselves. As far as the occupation, we had an occupation of land in the sense that the Amharas when the TPLF was in power, they took Amhara land and then gave it to Tigrayan tribe, and so they were suffering. There's a book called The Tears of Wilkite, and so you guys probably heard Tigray genocide. If you heard about Ethiopia, but that was debunked, and so the Tigrayans did die, but the main thing was to destroy the TPLF. And it's interesting that the TPLF they were pressing their own Tigrayans, and you guys probably heard of the famous World Food Program. Samantha Power, USAID. She's very nasty. She killed a Cameroonian boy in Africa and never got justice for that. And so we see these Western NGOs coming into Africa, even in the Middle East, and they play this forward politics. Red Cross, all these, name them, UNICEF, and all of them. There's a book about these NGOs and how especially like in Africa, for example, only 3% makes it to the village, and how they steal money, and how Red Cross and all these organizations, even the United Nations is guilty. We've had them have secret meetings with the TPLF, try to put them back into power, because when they were in power, they were working with the Americans. And not to be long-winded, but just to say the connection as far as, we understand genocide, we're having it right now, and it's very heavy in our hearts, but and the sad part about it is it's so dire, because we have tens of millions displaced, because our population is close to 40 million, and it's not on paper, because when people have power, they kind of just try to lie about the census, assimilation, displacing of people. I told you, burning of churches and mosques, raping of women, trigger warning, and so it's very sad. It's that bad. There was a small Amara, Muslim girl that's went viral, and she said, "I don't want to be Amara anymore." So she played God. She said, "Wallahi, I don't want to be Amara anymore. God, please, I'll never be Amara again." She was so it's very sad, but we would just like to build a coalition. So that's why when we had these protests in DC, when they would have Palestine protests, like, okay, well, hopefully we can. I know I've seen Sudanese there, Somalis there, Algerians there. I've seen some Egyptians when I would go. And so hopefully, we're trying to work together and try to create a coalition, because it would be stronger. And just like our past revolutionaries, Black Panthers have gone to Africa. They've been inspired by Kwame Nkrumah and Algeria and stuff like that. And Tom Sakata. So these type of people. So there's been international solidarity in the past. So I think we can do it again, and we shouldn't be like intimidated by the Anti-Defamation League or the APAC or anything like that, because at the end of the day, this is our humanity, right? So that's why I want to say thank you. Appreciate it.
Two things. Friend. I hope you're comfortable with me calling you friend.
Yeah.
Israel has been systematically, forcefully sterilizing Black and Middle Eastern Jewish people. That's a practice that's been going on for years, and they've been denying it for years. But so much journalistic evidence came to light last couple of years that Israeli government had to admit it. Yes, we are sterilizing Black and brown people without their knowledge. So you have, routine of, visit to a gynecologist or whoever, and you just can never, carry to term, and you don't know why. Well, the people have known why for a while now, and of course, nobody who lives in America would ever hear that. So it's a genocidal practice that I believe, honestly, Americans taught the world, because my first familiarity with this kind of forceful sterilization practice is what this country did to indigenous peoples of this land. So I'll just put that there, because just to say, yes, our struggles are connected, the oppressive systems are really similar, empire feeds off of each other and teaches each other these terrible things. I've been waiting for somebody to ask me, the Palestine stuff is going on, great, but what about Congo? Israel is the fourth biggest beneficiary from the genocide in Congo. The 6 million people in Congo have been killed with material and weapon support from United States, Britain, France, and Israel. Israel is trying to make themselves kind of the tech capital of the world, and the United States has been buying surveillance machinery, surveillance software for Israel for a long time. And I've seen people who demonstrating for Palestine, like people showing up with Sudan flags, people showing up with Congo flags, people showing up with queer flags, embracing every other struggle. And this is what usually happens, because when Black Lives Matter, kind of retook the global stage in 2020, and honestly, Black Lives Matter in 2020 was the most well-known, most powerful women, free women who created it, but also movement in the world. And yes, what's happening in Africa and Middle East all over the world, yes, it's the United States' fault, but what's happening to Gaza is up to people who live and work in the White House in the most immediate fashion. So this war is United States proxy war. There are connections, of course, to the genocide in Ethiopia, the injustice globally, but this is the most direct one. And my father said to me once, it's not we who are important. If we mattered, if I was something bigger than collateral damage to Israel and to the United States, so many of us wouldn't have been killed by now. Nobody cares about us, truly. We know that. We know who shows up for us, Black people, Indigenous people, queer people, and we know who doesn't. And it's not that we are important, that Palestine is somehow more important. Absolutely not. All of this, the last 75 years, 100 years would have happened. Our enemies are important. People who oppress us are important. This is why Palestine is all over the local news, not because anybody actually cares. Yes, there are people who care, but there's very, very few of them. But I really hope, and I will personally, continue educating people about the connection between apartheid Israeli regime and genocide in Congo, and what's the genocide in Sudan, all global conflicts, because, they have one root. All of this evil, it has one root. I kind of went to the tangent.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions, comments? Yeah. Yes, sure.
I know some people were watching online, so I just want to make sure that they could hear us on there, this recording. Just had a question around like organizations and political homes. I think in the beginning there was a few comments regarding Black Panthers, and recently I'm thinking also of the Black Liberation Army and the Palestinian resistance. Dante started to speak at the end a little bit about that as well, and just connecting it to how a lot of organizations locally, like some of the ones named, but also including Black Alliance for Peace, PACA, Pan-African Community Action, they're not just looking at legislation, particularly legislators like who was mentioned in Chicago, who came out for a ceasefire, but also when he was running for election, he also said that anything that delegitimizes Israel, he is not a supporter of. So these contradictions are heavy, is my point. So aside from the rhetoric of what legislators provide, just what would you speak to an audience, particularly if they don't have a political home, if they're not organizing, but they're more so mobilizing, going out to protest, going out to action, going out to book talks, but what's next after that? That should be done in tandem. So if you can speak to that a bit, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I know folks, like one of the main kind of things in the left right now is like join organization, but I think folks should take their time to join an organization. That's my personal opinion, because there's so many organizations out there in the United States, some with some terrible histories, or questionable things, and obviously this history of infiltration, all this stuff too, right? And you gotta deal with these type of questions. But I think going to the protests, you're very involved. Let's say like you just first time going to protests in this Palestinian movement, like this is like the first thing you're doing. You didn't go on a George Floyd uprising for whatever reason. If I were to tell someone to get involved with something, I mean, like the easiest thing is to show up to a protest, possibly meet some folks that are either speaking or organizing the events, and try to get involved in like what next thing is happening, or have a one-on-one over coffee or food or something like that. Get to know folks. I think the one criticism I have of a lot of the so-called left in DC is no one talks to each other. Like, some of us are friends or whatever, but like none of us are organizing our neighbors, none of us are really organizing like that. We have a lot of rhetoric. That's some criticism of myself too. But like a lot of us are not organizing where we live. A lot of us not, really trying to get people conscious that like our neighbors and such, like who we having conversations with about these issues, right? People watch the news or a podcast or whatever. And, all right, I'm gonna show up to protest. I'm against genocide, but like, to Ani's point earlier, like what's next? How can you get that person to stay involved? And this is a question I'm always asking myself, like what got me to stay involved, right? Like I show up to a book talk, I show up to a protest. eventually I joined something, right? But like what got me over that hump, and obviously like I'm an oppressed person, I'm Black, you know, my mother's been suffering like my entire childhood and growing up, and you know, I've dealt with my own issues, right? So obviously like once I started reading, I started making connections and shit, and I was like, oh, this makes the most sense. But you can't throw a book at everybody, be like, you know, you'll figure it out, you know, it's like everyone has their own way of coming into the movement, and I think as organizers we have to tap into every realm of people's lives. And that doesn't mean like one person has to do all that, but like if you're thinking about organizing, like how are you really reaching people in their day-to-day life, you know, politically, socially, economically, right? So like how are you really developing relationships with people? Because that's what's going to get people to join your organization and keep showing up and do stuff. Because some people join groups and just, you know, have no motivation to do anything because they're just, you know, there's a lot of what's it called, imposter syndrome, and because we read about these revolutionaries, we're like, oh, I can never be this person, you know. But like a lot of that's, you know, a lot of it's just the capitalist society we live in that it breeds that. So that individualist type of thing. So like we really got to fight for the collective and working in collectives and fighting for our collective strength and movements. So I don't know if that fully answered the question, but like in general sense, political home, I mean, like I think it takes time. Like I'm also a member of Black Lives for Peace. I work with PACA through the Alliance. You know, I have my personal criticisms of things, but like, you know, a lot of us are friends and we fight for the same things. But you know, like I won't just tell like a random Black person on the street, like, you need to join BAP right away. Like I think there needs to be some sort of relationship development that really needs to go into that process. So, and like, what are they gonna get out of joining this organization? What are you gonna do for them? Are you gonna show up to their community event or whatever it is? Like, you really have to figure out like what is gonna, this not really transactional relationship, but like how is this benefiting this person's life who's trying to put food on a kid's table or work their 3 jobs or whatever, or trying to find childcare. And I think people join things or get more involved with things through struggle. So if you can get folks to struggle and have a political orientation with that struggle, then that's going to get folks to be moving, which an organization provides, but you know, it's not necessarily the vehicle for everybody. So, thanks.
I love the concept of political home. Thank you for that. I do not have a political home. There are limitations that, you know, even the most progressive, the most radical person in America will never understand. The way I will never fully understand the oppression of Indigenous people or Black people and things like that. But what I'm trying to say is organize and or work with people who make you feel seen and heard. Whatever political cause they are, because activists so often, you know, we give up because, you know, we try to do feminism and you show up and it's all like upper middle class white feminism. We go, oh no, bye-bye, gotta go. So more so than looking at political home, look for like friends home. People who hear you, who see you, whose company you enjoy. That's political. Self-care is an act of revolutionary warfare.
Okay, another question. Sorry.
My name is Sipo Sitoke. I'm from South Africa. I don't know how to frame this question. I've been sitting here thinking, just from our South African experience, that what really brought down apartheid was on many fronts. We had huge international solidarity movement, but we also had certain levers that got to a point where apartheid South Africa could see that they could not continue in the system. One, there was a massive sports boycott. There was massive cultural boycott. But I think the biggest was the sanctions and the disinvestments. That really had a serious impact on the economy of South Africa. But behind that as well, there were prominent faces that were looked upon with high regard, whether it was Desmond and Bishop Tutu, or Nelson Mandela, who was in prison. Then we had certain blocks of countries, the Scandinavians, that was supporting. We had Cuba that was supporting. Then, of course, we had the Soviet Union. And I'm asking myself, what is going to break the camel's back with regard to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? What is it that the Palestinians have that they could say, if all of this happens, definitely Israel will relent and sort of give up. And then I become very pessimistic. And say, actually, I don't see, and I'm sorry to say that, I don't see a way out, except protest and protest. And the question is, protesting to who? That is the question. Thank you.
Thank you for continuing to wear the scarf I gave you.
Wish I feel so bad. I want to give it back to you.
No. People who have U.S. citizenship need to realize the responsibility they have because y'all decide the destiny of about 8 billion people in the world. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. I would give an arm to be able to vote. So I don't have to wake up every morning and wonder if my family is still alive for lunch. I don't know if they're alive now. Again, they got bombed today. They've been bombed and invaded for a year now. But the United States vote has power. I understand like the voter suppression is like as vicious as ever. I understand that very well. And I understand that for people with marginalized identities, even this kind of activism comes at a price. I know that very well. I learned that history well, what it costs Black people to be the only voices in the Western Hemisphere to support Palestinians. But if there is honestly any movement out there in the world, protest movement that can make any change, it's here in the United States. So this is your country, these are your voting rights. Use them, you have power. They try to make you believe that every single day that you're powerless, that you mean nothing, you're voting nothing. Not accurate. And if that wasn't the case, Black people would have to spend 400 years fighting for voting rights. So protest your government, protest the fact that you're paying for genocide so that already rich people can make more money off of your tax money that's sponsoring, the project of mining for, 500 billion cubic tons of natural gas in the Gaza Strip, which is what it's really about. And according to Kushner, very nice oceanfront properties. Yeah, by the way, if 45th becomes president, Jared Kushner is gonna be y'all's international affairs ambassador. So think about your ancestors, think about your friends all over the world. It's just, it does make a difference. Voting matters, protest matters. Changing the world is possible, it's happened before. It will happen again. I may not be alive for it, but I know it's coming.
I'll just respond very briefly. I don't know if I can add much to what you just said. But yeah, I just heard a quote, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, someone was telling me from someone from South Africa was saying the apartheid regime was like so bad, and then the next day they woke up and apartheid fell. Like, I'm paraphrasing, but it was like the sharpest contradictions in that society led to its downfall. And we're kind of seeing the same happen with Israel right now, in my opinion. I'm not saying it's gonna fall tomorrow, but the head has exposed itself completely. And it's being live streamed, as you said, on social media every day, massacres. Where under South African apartheid, that was not the case. You probably see it in newspapers, but like, young people are completely against this. So it's completely exposing the Israeli Zionist project. How racist it is, how fascist it is, how brutal it is. Just the statistic that I keep hearing that's just so depressing is like over 80% of Israelis like supported this genocide. I just can't, and that just shows it's a fascist society. But like, it blows my mind every time I hear that number. I'm just like, my God.
And bear in mind that 20% is Palestinians with Israeli.
Exactly, yeah.
There you go.
Exactly,
It's
yeah.
a bit more home.
Exactly, yeah. And you know, I follow the politics in Israel because I'm curious. And there is a coalition with Arab Palestinians, like Ida Tuman and folks, and a Hadash coalition. And I'm just curious, like, what the hell's going on there in general. You know, but it does not look great from the tiny little amounts of Arab folks that have some semblance of power. And yeah, you know, the humanitarian aid, you just see these settlers just blocking the aid to get in. And then, you know, I was just talking with Phyllis, what's her name from IPS. She wrote a piece in the Hill talking about airdrops in Afghanistan and relating to the airdrops happening in Gaza right now that the U.S. is dropping with the Jordanian army. And she was saying that, like, during the Afghanistan period where the U.S. occupied Afghanistan, you know, they were told that the civilians had to move away from the cities when they were getting bombed and into the mountains. And they were told, like, you had to put the aid on trucks and on camels, and then walk up the mountains to get the aid to people. But the U.S. Under Bush or whoever decided, oh no, I want like kind of like a photo op of just dropping aid from a plane. It looks better on the news. And this is like what's happening right now as well. Like they're just dropping aid from a plane and it's killing Palestinians, or like small amounts of food, or even like they're able to eat. So it's just like completely dehumanizing of a population. And then you see the violence in the West Bank with these settlers, right? And it's just absolutely horrible what's going on. And you see the Al-Aqsa Mosque, they just fenced it up. People can't, pray or practice their faith during Ramadan. And and obviously, folks in Gaza are starving. So, it's just a complete catastrophe. And, I'm not the one that's like saying like, oh, we need the worst conditions to overthrow the entire system. Like, no, like, I don't believe in that because I don't believe people should sacrifice their lives to liberate themselves. I mean, like, yes, we do recognize people will have to sacrifice themselves, but like, through this type of like fascist occupation and siege, like, that's not what we're talking about. We believe people can go use arms to liberate themselves, etc. That happened in Angola, that happened in South Africa, that happened in Rhodesia, Zimbabwe now, Algeria, etc., Vietnam, China, etc. So like, we do need to really look deeply at the resistance and how that is being supported globally, how do we get to a point where folks can have the tools to liberate themselves in that area? So that is a central question that I think a lot of people just don't want to deal with just because of the repression here. But voting is great. I'm not going to comment on voting much, but yes, you should vote. Local elections, national, whatever. But getting organized, I think, is the most important thing. Like your workplace. And why I'm saying that is because during apartheid in South Africa and even with Israel, like, the dock workers and like people that do shipments of arms, they can block them. So if your union is organized, like the longshoremen or the maritime union, you can, if you're organized and you have a left orientation, you probably block the shipments completely. So that's the type of organizing that we need to be doing. And you see people, the difference, well, not really difference, but I mean, the sheer amount of people dying in such a short amount of time is making people, obviously we have to increase their tactics like on a faster scale compared to probably other movements. And that's why it just seems so difficult because like organizing takes time and years, maybe 10 years to get a union in your workplace. You just don't have time for that because how many more people have to fucking die to you know, to stop this. So this is why people are like just, you know, going out, blocking bridges, blocking everything, which completely support. We should be blocking everything and not having business as usual. But we still need to get organized. So it comes back to that, these questions that keep coming up, you know, political home, organization, you know, the long-term struggle. You know, it's protracted, it's something that we have to continue to build. These mass coalitions, these mass movements. And I think we might get kicked out, but
Yeah, it's,
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
about to.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. So on that note, I was going to say, I want to thank you all again for coming. I want to thank Sankofa for hosting us. I want to thank them particularly for letting us stay over time as well. Yeah, so I hope we can take what we learned today and organize. I think that's the message we're leaving with. So thank you all very much.
Voting uncommitted is voting. Just
yes.
clear that.
Yo, yeah. No, I'm not yet.
Wow, I feel so bad.
What? No. Why
You have,
did
you
you
have
feel bad?
another one.
What does it matter? I wanted you to have it. Who else in this country right now than a South African person?
Man, this is something, eh? I was showing it.
I really like them.